ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुद्रयेत्। श्रीमद्भगवद्गीता साधका संजीवनी 9th chapter, the most confidential knowledge, verses 11 to 15. Condemnation of those who don't know God's glory, mention of those who embrace a demoniac, devilish and deluding nature, and description of the worship of those devotees who embrace the divine nature. The ignorant people who, without having an inclination for the Lord, follow the opposite path have been described in the next two verses. Verse 11. Avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools disregard me as one putting on the human body, not knowing my supreme nature as the great Lord of beings. Comment. The great Lord is He who is the ruler, patron, director and supervisor of nature, from whom nature derives power to create, preserve and destroy the animate and inanimate beings, and who is the master of the gods, who control their own worlds, to which different beings go according to their actions. Without his will, not even a leaf of a tree moves. Fools slight him, taking him as an ordinary mortal in the human form. They treat the incarnation of the Lord as an ordinary human being. As a common man, by identifying himself with a body, thinks that the family honor or dishonor is his own, and gain and loss of property, etc. is also his own. As common beings were not manifest before birth and will not be manifest after death, they are manifest only in the interim. The deluded persons treat him such a common man. They regard him as a slave to the human body like a common man. The human body of the Lord is not the fruit of any action. He incarnates by his own free will. As a fish, a tortoise, a boar, etc. He does not depend on the body, but the body, an evolute of nature, depends on him, because he manifests himself keeping his nature under control. The fools, treating the Lord as an ordinary being, disregard the Lord, under whose supervision nature brings forth and merges infinite universes, who controls the activities of the universes and who by his grace has bestowed this human body. They think low of him by regarding him as a common earth-bound man, attaching importance to the mundane prosperity and pleasures. In the next verse, the Lord describes the ways of those fools who are not able to understand the divinity in the incarnation of the Lord. Verse 12. Mogha shap mogha karmano मोघा ज्ञाना विचित्सहा राक्षीम आसुरीम चैवा प्रकृतिम मोहिनीम श्रितः. Those fools with vain hopes, vain actions and vain knowledge have embraced a nature which is fiendish, demoniacal and delusive. Comment. The hopes of those people who by having a disinclination for God have a desire for pleasures and heaven are vain, because it is not a rule that such hopes must be fulfilled. Even if they are fulfilled, they perish after bearing fruit. The actions of the people who have a disinclination for God are vain, because if they perform actions approved by the scriptures for their fruit, they with their fruit will perish. Their fruit will carry the people to the higher regions from where they will have a return. Thus, they waste their time, energy and intellect in vain. They remain blank, being deprived of the real gain of human life. The knowledge of languages, scripts, arts, literature and the universe, etc. of those people who have a disinclination for God is vain, because that knowledge can't lead them to salvation. They can't be free from the bondage of birth and death. By having a disinclination for God, even after acquiring a lot of knowledge, they will follow the wrong course in the same way as an accountant can't maintain the right account if there is an error in any number in the account. Thus, they will have a downfall. It means that man, being a portion of God, is eternal, while actions and their fruits are perishable. So, he will gain nothing besides pain and disquietude by performing actions for their fruit unless and until he attains God. On the other hand, the actions that are performed for God to please him and are offered to him are not perishable but real. Those senseless persons having a disinclination for God embrace a nature which is fiendish, demoniacal and delusive. Persons with demoniacal nature are those who, without caring for the pain and loss of others, are ever engaged in their selfish motive, in fulfilling their desires and hoarding money for the enjoyment of sensual pleasures, etc. Persons with fiendish nature are those who become angry with those whom they think obstacle to the fulfillment of their desires, and so they harm and ruin them for their own selfish motive. Persons possessing a delusive nature are those who, without rhyme or reason, trouble others. They shoot the flying birds and hit a sleeping dog and are pleased. In all the three natures, the root nature is demoniacal. This demoniacal nature is of three types. Desire is the root of demoniacal nature. If the desire is not fulfilled, anger sprouts forth, and from anger ensues delusion. This delusion is born of greed and folly also. After describing the ways of the fools in the 11th and 12th verses, now the Lord describes the ways of the devotees. Verse 13. Mahatmanastu mam partha devim prakritim ashritaha bhajantya ananya manaso gyatva bhutadim avayam. But great souls who possess a divine nature, knowing me as the prime cause of creation and imperishable, worship me constantly with undivided mind. Comment. Deva stands for God, Paramatma, and Prakritim stands for nature. God is Sat, real. So all the good qualities and conducts are included in divine nature. It depends upon man whether he possesses divine nature or not. Those who by possessing them have an inclination for God attain salvation. Divine traits are natural. If a man thinks that he has cultivated these traits with his effort, he feels proud. But if he feels that they are natural divine gift, he is not proud. A man's pride is aroused only in imperfection. When a man has pride by saying, I always speak the truth, it means that sometimes he tells a lie also, otherwise he can't have pride. A man may possess divine traits only when his only aim is to attain God. By depending on those traits to realize God, he can have an inclination for him, and then instead of having pride, he possesses politeness, simplicity and modesty, and receives ever enhancing zeal in spiritual discipline. Worship of the Lord in any way is fruitful, but the devotee who worships him with exclusive devotion by having affinity, I am only God's and only God is mine, is immensely benefited. A devotee is engaged in worship for a few hours. His relationship with God remains so long as he is engaged in worship. But the other devotee regards himself as God's and God as his. His relationship with God is everlasting because this relationship is real and eternal. Whatever actions, mundane or spiritual, he performs with his body, senses, mind and intellect are to please the Lord, and so are different forms of worship to him. This is adoration with undivided mind. Having described his devotees in the preceding verse, the Lord in the next verse describes how they worship him. Verse 14. Sattatam kirtyanto mam yattantascha dridavrattaha namastyanscha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upaste. Constantly chanting my names and glories, striving firm in views, prostrating before me, they worship me with devotion ever steadfast. Comment. A man can remain always steadfast only in worshipping God. not in mundane pleasures and accumulation of prosperity, because he gets disgusted with pleasures and loses taste for accumulation sometimes, but his determination and aim of God realization ever remain the same. The natural affinity of a man with God, I am God's and God is mine, ever remains steadfast in wakefulness, sleep, sound sleep, in loneliness, during worship, and in company while performing different actions. As a man always remembers that he is the son of Mr. X, a striver accepts his affinity with the Lord, that he who is the prime cause of creation, the imperishable, the supreme Lord, is his and he is his, and thus he ever remains steadfast. As the worldly people nourish their family with attachment and strive for pleasures and prosperity, so do devotees strive for God realization ardently. Efforts of such devotees, seemingly mundane, are not really mundane, as their aim is God. So their activities are directed towards God. The devotees sometimes chant the names and glories of the Lord, sometimes read the scriptures, and sometimes give divine talks or hold divine discourses, and so on. All of them are hymns of the Lord. They prostrate before the Lord by having the feeling that whatever divine traits they possess and whatever spiritual inclination they have is only by His grace. They hold that their promptness and inclination towards God is not the result of their efforts. The virtues and good conduct have been developed in them by His grace, so they can merely prostrate. The devotees, having undivided devotion, perform all actions, whether spiritual or even mundane, such as eating, drinking, sleeping, waking, business, and farming, etc., only for Him, to please Him. Strivers are of several kinds. The strivers who follow the discipline of devotion have been described in the previous two verses. Now the Lord describes the other strivers. Verse 15. ज्ञानायज्ञेन चाप्यन्ये यजन्तो माम् उपासते एकत्वेन पृथक्त्वेन बहुधा विश्वतो मुखम्. Others worship me through their offering of knowledge, while still others worship me in my universal form, taking me to be diverse in diverse celestial forms. Comment. As hunger of the hungry persons is the same, and the same is the satisfaction after having meals, but their taste is different. Similarly, strivers have the same need to realize God and they attain the same Lord, but according to their faith, interest, and taste. Their methods of worship are different. But there is one important difference. Those who want to seek satisfaction in perishable worldly things are never satisfied, but those who, having a disinclination for the world, are inclined towards spiritualism are perfectly satisfied after attaining God, and then for them nothing remains to be done, to be known, and to be achieved. Several strivers following the discipline of knowledge by renouncing the unreal through discrimination worship His attributeless, formless aspect regarding the pure consciousness as His very self. Some other strivers following the discipline of action regarding themselves as servants and the world as the universal form of the Lord serve it with their bodies, senses, minds, intellects, possessions, resources, and actions. They ever serve the Lord in the form of public common men and by God's grace attain perfection. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Sri Partha Sarthi, Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, Srimad Bhagavad Geeta. Sri Hari Arpanamastu.